So, my name's Cameron Russell. I'm your host for today, and our tech support is Yvonne Letton. She's there to make sure we all behave, but we are not the important people. Jen Hanson-Peterson is our, I suppose, lecturer today. Who's talking to us
Yeah.
about being a Type 4. Welcome, Jen.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you everybody a little bit about Jen, who hasn't had the chance yet, and then we'll have a welcome to country, and we'll get into it if that's all right with everybody.
That sounds
So, here's a little bit of a few things about Jen. So, Jen is the founder of ThriveWise Consultancy and works with schools and businesses to cultivate systemic well-being through positive psychology and emotional intelligence. She's a highly experienced consultant, coach, and facilitator dedicated to helping organizations and their people. Ah, can you tell I'm a little nervous? Flourish this morning. So Jen holds a master's in human development from the University of British Columbia and is an IECL trained organizational coach and an IEQ9 accredited practitioner in individual and team coaching. She's previously spent 8 years as a senior trainer with the Institute of Positive Education and co-authored the book Handbook of Social and Emotional Learning. In addition to her work at ThriveWise, Jen delivers units of community service and mental health at Box Hill Institute. As a social type 4, her mission is to bring depth, meaning, and truth to the professional landscape, moving beyond surface level typology to help others uncover their shared humanity and cultivate genuine presence. She's also really lovely, and we had a really nice chat to begin with. So I will do the welcome to country, and then I'll hand over to Jen. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that we are joining from across Australia and pay my respects to elders, present and past, and also acknowledge the Murri people of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and extend that respect to all First Nations people with us today. Okay, with no further ado, Jen.
lovely. Thank you so much for that warm introduction. I'm super excited to get the chance to speak to you today about the fours being a type four. I find it such a privilege to get to help people better understand how the type fours tick. What we're all about and what makes us special and unique, and also some of the things that trip us up. I think the more awareness we have as individuals and as a collective, the more we can help each other grow together. So I think it's going to be a really, really fun exploration, and I'm hoping we'll get to go nice and deep together into the type four. So I'm just going to really dive right in and give you an overview of what the fours are all about. We're often referred to as the intense creative, the individualist, or the tragic romantic. So we have lots of different labels that are used to describe who we are and how we present in the world. We really, at the core of it, our deepest desire is to be unique, to be authentic, for us to feel a sense of significance, for us to bring some kind of value and meaning to the world, and really for people to see us and value us for who we really are. And so our core fear is that we don't have significance or that we don't have a strong sense of identity. And we can have this kind of sense of existential dread if we feel like we're ordinary or, misunderstood. I think, on a daily basis, I feel like I over explain things all the time to people because I feel like I just want to make sure they understand where I'm coming from. And so to walk away from a conversation feeling like someone didn't quite understand where I was coming from, or viewing me in a way that didn't feel quite right with who I know that I am, that really is the thing that kind of keeps me up at night. So that's, you know, really our core fear for every type is what drives our behavior, right? So we are constantly trying to move away from that fear, and move towards that core desire. So in terms of our worldview, there's this kind of constant search for meaning and depth, to really try to outrun that fear of insignificance. And so we, have this kind of ongoing internal dialogue about, I must be true to myself and I must make a difference. One of the phrases that my dad used to say to me all the time when I was growing up, I'm pretty sure he's a type 8. He would regularly say to me, be yourself, be yourself. And that like has echoed through my head, since childhood, and has, yeah, really shaped who I am. I'm not sure how people feel about, whether we're born a certain type or if we kind of morph into a certain type, but for whatever reason, that phrase has really stood out to me since childhood, to always be myself and to be true to myself. And importantly, to move through the world feeling like I'm making a difference, like I am making the world, more beautiful, more true, more honest. Always feeling like I'm entering into social interactions, like kind of wanting to, uh, pull the mask off people, essentially. Like if I feel like there's too much falseness in the room, I get this kind of itch where I'm like, let's go deep together. I really want us to, really just, I don't know, be authentic, be our truest self. And so that's, yeah, awkward when you're standing at a playground with your 5-year-old and your 7-year-old, and you're like trying to talk to the playground moms, and you just want to go deep with somebody. So that's kind of my wrestling that I deal with on a daily basis, trying not to be the weird mom on the playground. In terms of embodiment, and the three centers, so you might be familiar with the three centers of the heart center, the head center, and the gut or the action center. And the type fours, we sit in the heart center. So, we're processing life, through our feelings, through our mood. We also absorb feelings as well. So, kind of absorbing the emotional climate around us. And it's kind of a coping mechanism or a strategy that we use to essentially protect ourselves, to, almost kind of sometimes judge ourselves before others can judge us. You kind of take ownership over that judgment, that you might be, subjected to. And so, uh, if there are fellow type fours in this space, you definitely would understand that feeling of walking into a room and you feel the climate, and it can be quite powerful and overwhelming sometimes to just know exactly how everyone is feeling in a space, and learning to, yeah, I guess, sit with that without maybe needing to fix it if it kind of stresses you out. And we'll talk about that stress line, in a minute. Um, and, to also move to action is something that we fours find quite challenging. So, because we're so heart dominant, and tend to be very, under involved in the action or body center, you might find as a four that we drag our feet a lot until something feels right. And if it doesn't feel right, we can have that tendency to stall a bit. But that's also a bit of an overgeneralization. I have met fours who are a bit more action dominant. They still score quite highly in the feeling center, but, I'm picturing a colleague that I had who, she used to walk around in like a very corporate setting with like cowboy boots on. She was definitely a somatic four, where she just like projected her emotional depth and her being outwardly. And she had done the IEQ 9 with me, and she scored very high on the action center. She was, yeah, just a sort of a force to be reckoned with. So yeah, in terms of these kind of diversity of expressions, you do have the more cerebral fours where maybe they move a bit more in between or quickly from feeling to thinking and less so with action, which is where I sit. So more introspective, a bit more broody and analytical, struggling to move to action until things feel right. And then that somatic four who moves more quickly into that action space. And thinking might come a little bit later. So, you often see quite a lot of yeah, attention to style and creation and that kind of physical doing to establish their identity. So this is me as a case study that high in feeling, medium in thinking, and pretty low in action. Um, I was reflecting on this the other day about my kind of low low action center. I think a funny metaphor. I have a little bit of a garden in our front yard, and every day I would walk past this patch where I'd noticed a lot of acorns had landed from, we have an acorn tree, oak tree on our nature strip, and it occasionally drops a ton of acorns into our yard. And every day I would walk past this patch where I was been worried about having oak trees kind of taking over. And I see the little acorns on the ground, and I notice, and it's like, might end up getting some oak trees there. And then you start to see them sprout, and now they're getting bigger, and now they're taking root. And if I just kind of move to action and grab those acorns right when they hit the ground, when I first noticed them and first started worrying about them, I wouldn't now have like 10 little mini oak trees starting to grow in a spot where I don't want them to grow. So that's kind of my dilemma as a four is that thinking, noticing something, feeling something about it, kind of overthinking or going in circles about something that could potentially have a really easy solution. And so that's something that I try to be really mindful of in my day to day, and tends to slip a bit more when I'm a bit stressed. But that's the work that myself as a four, continues to journey on. So if we're looking at the different areas of feeling, thinking, and action, it's quite common for fours to feel a sense of shame or envy, and really feel the comfort of melancholy. So not necessarily depression, but just there's this kind of sadness of sorts that we tend to wear like a cloak or a blanket. There's almost something comforting in kind of brooding and sitting in the muck of sadness. I remember, one of my kind of fondest childhood memories would be my family and I would go on these really long car drives, when it was in the evening, didn't have much to do, didn't want to sit around watching TV, so we'd just drive around, and I loved it because it gave me peace and quiet time to just sit and like think about the kind of things that were going on in my life at school that maybe I was a bit sad about, or friendship that was struggling, or that was kind of my safe space to just kind of go into fantasy mode in my head and kind of dwell on my feelings, and that just felt and feels very natural to me. And so, yeah, everything is kind of filtered through this emotional state. In terms of our thinking center, you tend to see this as coming through in terms of high creativity and intuition, a tendency to internalize negative feedback. We all have, humans naturally tend to lean into this negativity bias. But particularly for fours, it's this kind of focus on what's missing. There's this kind of deep longing that, when it's introjected, when it's turned inward towards ourselves, can really erode our sense of self, our self-esteem. And so that's something, we need to be very careful about. Um, and that interesting sort of two sides of the same coin of both feeling flawed and feeling special at the same time. That, in one moment you can be sitting in a room feeling like looking around thinking, ah, I'm the best in the room, to suddenly a moment later being like, oh, I'm such an idiot, and be starting to beat yourself up over something. So it's an interesting quick flip that happens for a four in those ways. In terms of our action, yeah, we tend to struggle to trust our gut instincts, tend to delay into moving, until we feel ready to take action. And as I said, when stressed or stagnant, we tend to turn inward and withdraw, and also like to project that uniqueness, like my corporate cowboy friend with her cowboy boots. And a really common somatic marker for type fours is this tenseness or a tightness in our lower abdomen when we're feeling disconnected from the present moment. And I think that's a really helpful thing for any fellow fours in the room to notice that in ourselves when we're feeling that tenseness. Because we tend to be a bit disconnected from our bodies, I think it's really helpful to start tuning into when we're feeling that tightness, and what is it about the situation, or what stories are we telling ourselves that can kind of drive that disconnection from the present moment and from those around us. So this work, in terms of subtypes, comes from Beatrice Chestnut's work. So fours can look vastly different from what I've read. Fours, um, it- each four subtype can almost make these fours look totally different from each other. So uh, we're a very complex bunch, but ultimately we have the same engine driving us around that need for authenticity, and that kind of core fear of insignificance. But in terms of how it shows up, this is myself, the social four, titled Shame. So we find meaning through our vulnerability, find, that we find a sense of connection through kind of communal suffering of sorts, and bringing, and wanting to contribute to the greater good, to the social groups that we're part of. There's the self-preservation fours, which are called tenacity. And this is the counter type. They tend to be quite stoic. They tend to suffer in silence. They can often have a bit of a sunny disposition, like sometimes, like my corporate cowboy friend. She was a self-preservation four, and she would tell you some pretty heavy stuff, but with like a huge grin on her face, where it was like this cognitive dissonance, being like, wow, that was really heavy what you just shared, but had this real stoic way about her. Um, so that's yeah, how another way that fours can show up in the world. And then finally, the sexual or one-on-one type four, which is called competition. And these are quite intense creatives. They're very vocal about their needs, often use competition to outrun suffering. They want to kind of be the best in the room. And this is where that, their envy kind of shows up, where they quickly move to action to yeah, to kind of be the best in the room that they're in. Now, as I said, we all, all fours tend to have this kind of common element to them about yeah, about that fear of insignificance. We can often feel a bit like fish out of water, like we're looking at the world a bit like we're on the other side of a fish tank. And that can, be hard to sit with, to, move through spaces where you just always kind of feel like you don't quite belong. Um, and, it kind of then, leads us into, um, yeah, sitting in spaces within ourselves and getting very comfortable and familiar with this kind of sadness that we carry. Um, and I think, in really peaceful and tranquil times in history, I think, we particularly can feel that fish out of water sense. But interestingly, I think where we shine is when the world is going through some heavy and dark stuff. Fours have this incredible capacity to sit with that darkness without feeling the need to move in to fix it, to be in those depths with others. I found this book called The Spirit of Man in my local antique shop a few months back, when I was going through a bit of wrestling around identity, business stuff, and it's all about it's like an anthology of poems and short essays and stories that was compiled by Robert Seymour Bridges, a poet laureate, back in 1916 during World War One. And it was this book that was meant to offer like moral support and consolation to soldiers and civilians who were facing this huge stress. And when I was flicking through it, I was just like, this guy's got to be a four to I guess put together this compilation of beautiful, deep texts around the human spirit, around faith, around, you know, everything you can imagine, um, to try to kind of compile um, this work that really speaks to and brings voice to courage and faith in the human spirit, um, is quite beautiful. And I think that's something so unique about the fours is that we have this gift to find beauty even in the darkest of spaces. That this I think is where a lot of our power lies, is that empathy that we bring to the world, that we can sit alongside others in pain and grief and anguish without that need to fix it. And that in doing so, we aren't dismissing emotions, we aren't glossing over stuff. We are sitting and offering space to people, to humanity, to really process big, heavy, dark things that happen in our lives and in the world. And so I think that is really our unique purpose as fours, is to offer that space for healing, to be that presence in crises. I think, with family members of mine who've gone through some pretty traumatic events, um, I know that when I've been in that space with them, just holding space for them, that's when I've felt the most alive. That's when I have felt like, wow, my purpose is actually is actually being fulfilled in this moment. So, in terms of our path for development, so if you're familiar with the Enneagram symbol, you know that each type has two lines that come off of it, and those are our lines of connection. So, one of the lines for the four is to the type one. This is in different theorists call them different things. The integrative Enneagram refers to it as the line of release. And so for the type one, moving towards the perfectionist type, this is about becoming more objective, um, about moving out of those emotional whirlpools into these objective facts and finding this kind of grounding in mundane tasks and taking care of business, using structure and routine to stay grounded, particularly in challenging times. That, oftentimes for many people, our routines and things go out the window when we're stressed, and it's particularly important for fours to stick to their routine, stick to their structure, as a path for growth and health. And some refer to this as the stress line. I like to think of it as more of a stretch line. So I mentioned earlier that, if I walk into a room and I'm feeling like the emotional climate's a bit off and it starts to stress me out, I can go into that kind of helper fixer mode. Um, but also this line, if we think of it as a stretch line, it can be one of the most powerful movements for a four, where it's not about reacting to a stressful climate, but just genuinely and intentionally and deliberately moving to service of others, shifting away from, who that kind of navel gazing wrestling of who am I to how can I support somebody else right now? Lifting our gaze and looking for those who could use our support or use our help in this kind of genuine act of service. So there's also the wings that we have. So again, each type has the numbers on either side of them that are very helpful for our for moving through our day in a more balanced kind of way instead of being bound by our type. And so for the four, we've got the type 3 wing and the type 5 wing. So the three, the achiever or the performer. This can really offer type 4s the gift of effectiveness, kind of balancing out that internal drama with, that practicality of moving more quickly to action, to actually implement and follow out these kind of creative visions that we have. I've got such a laundry list of different projects and ideas that I've half started that I haven't seen fully through um, because I don't use my type 3 wing enough. I tend to have a much heavier type 5 wing. So I'm going to wave to my Yvonne and Cam, the fives. They'll know all about this of going into, that investigator observer mode instead. So I get stuck in my head a lot, which, offers balance as well to the four who, again, being quite emotional, um, offers balance around intuition and logic, helping take things perhaps less personally, being able to hold stuff out in a more objective manner, and to, move from impulse to restraint. In terms of levels of awareness and integration, there's a whole spectrum of health when we think of every single type. Um, we can show up in a very healthy way where we're more integrated, where we're less attached to our Enneagram type, right? That's one of the core aspects of the Enneagram theory is that we are actually keeping ourselves in a box, and that, the more awareness we have of our patterns and our kind of ways of doing and thinking and feeling, the more we can kind of catch ourselves and say, who do I actually want to be right now? My default right now in this moment, the stimulus has happened, something's happened, and my default is to do this, but we're building in the pause to say, actually, is that really what I want to do right now? Like for me, assertiveness, I've always kind of associated with aggression, right? And so I've kind of cast that to the wayside as like that's a bad way of being. And the more integrated I've become, the more I'm able to say, actually, I need a bit of 8 energy right now, or I need a bit of 3 energy right now to stand up for myself or to move this project forward or whatever it is, where I'm able to now say, my 4 energy wants to make me withdraw from this situation and have somebody rescue me from the thing that I'm going through, but actually I need to rescue myself. And so I'm going to draw on the energy of other types to achieve my goal, to do whatever it is that I'm needing to do. So these, I'm only going to show a couple levels of awareness, but this comes from a really great app that I love to use when I first start, when I meet somebody and I start talking about the Enneagram, I usually say, you should download this app. It's such a great little tool. You've got it on your phone, so when you're sitting and talking to people about the Enneagram and as we all do, you can pull this up on your phone and it's all based on, Russ Hudson's work, the Enneagram Institute. It's developed by, his name's Elon Ben Ami. He's a licensed professional counselor, and Reverend Lori Olson, a psychotherapist and non-sectarian minister. And so they've just made the Enneagram super accessible and app friendly. And so that's where these descriptions come from because I find them very poetic. At the kind of lowest level for a type four, we can kind of get trapped in that victim identity that, I mentioned before, that kind of desire to be saved by for the white knight to kind of come in and save us. Feeling like, this sort of fatally flawed sense of being, that there's something missing or broken within us, and that can really take over, your sense of self, your sense of identity, and make it very hard to move to action because you're feeling weighed down by this kind of victim identity. And so, it can really cause one to withdraw and become self-absorbed, where mood is consistently overriding facts. And again, the more we become aware of those patterns and the more we kind of question them or challenge them, the more we can start moving up the levels. I'm going to jump up to level 4, the grounded creative. This is, where we start to bring our creative beauty into the world. And yet, this is not the pinnacle of health. So I know when I was kind of at this level, um, myself, I remember doing this activity where we were looking through, like doing a values card sorting activity. And I remember, seeing ones that really jumped out at me as a 4, things like authenticity and integrity and creativity. And I remember seeing the word balance, and I had like a visceral, disgusted reaction to the word balance, which I found so interesting, that I had this kind of reaction that balance is boring and um, like that I just undervalued it. I don't know. I felt like, another one was joy. I was like, ooh, joy. I had this kind of interesting reaction to it. And I think it's so fascinating for us, for any type to kind of think through, what are the things that we value, but also what are the values where we have this kind of negative reaction to it, and to be curious about that. What is it about those values that don't feel uh, important, or how could that potentially be holding us back in our development? Because I'm not saying that I'm at level 5. I fluctuate all over the place amongst the levels, but after that activity, I walked away and thought, wow, I think really balance is the answer for me. That having that structure, stability, that's actually going to help bring a lot of well-being to my life. And that joy that I've been undervaluing, and stability, like all of those elements that I had an interesting visceral reaction to. Actually, I think those are the keys to unlocking some of some of my well-being. So something to be curious about. So, moving up to level 5, the alchemist. I find that such a cool word, the alchemist. This is the higher mind. So when we move from seeking meaning to actually creating it, to going out and making meaning instead of just hoping that we're going to kind of stumble upon it. Um, and transitioning from a search for what's missing to becoming a guide to the unknown. So helping others um, work out for themselves what um, what their deepest longings are. Help them through pain, and help them uh, through finding meaning as well. That we can be this real beautiful support to others when we bring this kind of presence to the world, to relationships, we can really help transform people's pain into beauty. And so using our sensitivity to find the sacred in the hidden depths of the human experience. So I wanted to share from that book, The Spirit of Man, um, one of the little passages that kind of stopped me in my tracks a bit when I was flicking through it, that I felt really kind of captures what a four is all about. So it says here, the deepest thing in our nature is this dumb region of the heart, and dumb not meaning dumb, but like unintelligent, not unintelligent, but just like quiet and silent part of us. Um, this dumb region of the heart in which we dwell alone with our willingnesses and our unwillingnesses, our faiths and our fears. As through the cracks and crannies of caverns, those waters exude from the earth's bosom, which then form the fountainheads of springs. So, in these crepuscular depths of personality, the sources of all our outer deeds and decisions take their rise. Here is our deepest organ of communication with the nature of things. And compared with these concrete movements of our soul, all abstract statements and scientific arguments, the veto, for example, which the strict positivist pronounces upon our faith, sound to us like mere chatterings of the teeth. I just thought that was just so beautiful to think of, this space that's deep within us that fours have this real beautiful access to, that we can bring people to as a place for deep understanding, for deep healing, for just, this real beauty where we can access our presence. And so I'd actually really love to um, spend a little bit of time going through an experiential kind of activity. I guess you call it like a guided meditation of sorts. Essentially, about a year ago, I had started writing I guess you call it an autobiography. I was reflecting on childhood and started just I was fascinated by the loss of innocence of childhood, of thinking of, who we were when we were little, and what things have we kind of lost along the way as we move into our adult spaces. And so I was kind of writing this autobiography, and I had all I can call it is like a vision, because it felt like I was writing, and it started out as my thoughts and my voice, and it sort of turned into this thing that felt like it was otherworldly, where it was like this chain of thoughts that didn't feel quite like they were from me anymore. And um, if we're willing, you don't have to participate. It's fine if you don't feel comfortable, but um, I'd love to take you through that experience that I had, putting yourself in kind of the first person shoes and see what comes of it for you. Um, so if you're willing, go ahead and just find a nice comfortable space where you're seated. Feel free to turn off your camera if you want, if it feels too funny to have that on. I always invite people to do that if they'd like to. And I'd just like you to, yeah, just first and foremost, bring some awareness to your body in this space, just grounding your presence, feeling your feet on the floor, and just being in the here and the now. And I'd like to take you back to yourself as a child. I'd like you to imagine yourself as a young person in this beautiful meadow with these white daisies dotted across the meadow and this real lovely gentle breeze that's blowing. And everything feels as it should be. You feel fully you, alive and untethered. Feel fully in your element as a child. And you notice on the edge of the meadow a cave that looks dark, curious. And you're interested in what's in there. A little scared to approach it, but nevertheless, you make your way towards this cave, the mouth of the cave. And you notice up ahead, above you, the real blue, calm sky is starting to look a bit stormy now. And the atmosphere has shifted, and you're starting to feel perhaps a bit nervous. But yet you feel almost this hand pushing you into the cave. It is so dark, you just can't see anything. And so you're standing at the threshold of the cave, a bit too afraid to take the next step in. But as you're standing there, you hear this scream from deep within the cave, a shouting. And you think you recognize the voices. For me, I thought it was the voices of my daughters. And so you break out into a sprint, wanting to help, to save whoever it is in that cave who you think you know. But it's complete darkness, and you're tripping and fumbling and falling over the rocks and the bits of cave that are there. It's an unsteady, unstable ground. And every time you go in back into a sprint, you fall again. And you feel defeated. You feel the terror of needing to help whoever it is who's in the cave, but you can't get yourself up long enough to make any progress. And while sitting there feeling battered and bloody and bruised, suddenly two creatures appear on either side of you. On the left is an orange tiger, and on the right is a white tiger. They draw close to you, and you're able to kind of straddle your arm and your leg, the left arm and your left leg over the orange tiger, and your right arm and your right leg over the white tiger. And they break out into a sprint. carrying you through the cave. And you feel like you're making progress. And then suddenly, it almost feels like the bottom just drops out. And you're tumbling, bashing against rocks, falling. And in my vision, I almost could feel myself moving through my body from the top of my head down, down, like this cave is down in your gut, where finally you crashed out at the bottom, so broken that you almost feel dead, like you have just gone through this experience that was so traumatic to the body that you don't even know how you're going to lift yourself up. And you look down and you are covered from head to toe in this black soot. And yet you have the energy to slowly sit up and begin to dust yourself off a little when you notice, as you look around, something's in the corner of the cavern. And as your eyes adjust to the darkness, you see a few people over in the corner. And you recognize that they are you, different yous at different stages of your life, from a newborn baby to a toddler to a young person to a young adult. They're lined up, huddled together in this space in the corner of the cavern. And you make your way over. And you offer them comfort because they seem scared. And in my vision, I remember placing my hand on the little baby's stomach that seemed tight and tense and offered healing. And perhaps for you, it's something else. You may notice one of those versions of you needing some kind of comfort, some kind of healing. So I invite you to place your hand on one of those versions of yourself. Maybe it's on the head or on the shoulder, and just offering healing and comfort. And just breathing into that space. And now you kind of start to become aware again of your surroundings in that cavern, looking around together and thinking, how on earth are we ever going to get out of here? This sense of kind of helplessness, of the being down in this dark, scary space, stuck there together. And then the orange tiger says, there's nothing to be afraid of. This is actually my home. And he takes you around the corner where the cavern, the vastness of the cavern just opens up into this beautiful illuminated space where it almost looks like stained glass up above, beautiful colors, this warm, inviting, open space. And there lying before you is a lake, this little lake in the middle of the cavern that has this, like that rainbow effect on it. It's kind of, yeah, like rainbow water. And you make your way over to that lake. And you lower yourself into it and you invite all those different versions of you into this lake. And as you move through it, it feels not like water, but uh, like mercury, this metallic kind of liquid that feels heavier than water. And you feel this healing within yourself, within all those little versions of you sitting together in this beautiful, stunning cavern. And whatever truth speaks to you starts to emerge in that space. For me, it was that sense of that I don't need to be special to exist. I already exist. I don't need to search for meaning. I am the meaning maker. And I imagine, depending on your type, it may be a different message that you start to feel the healing power of a space like this. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be strong. Just be present. Just allow yourself to exist. Realize that your divine nature is hidden within you. You are already whole. And for me, the vision then just kind of dissipated from there. And I found myself sitting there in front of my pen and paper, wondering what on earth was that I just experienced. But now I know that it is a place that I can return to when I need that sense of groundedness, of healing, of presence. It's a place I envision when I'm sitting with others who perhaps need a bit of healing themselves. Knowing that we each have this incredible space within us that we can return to whenever we need it. And so I invite you now to just slowly bring your awareness back to the space you're in. Just wiggling your feet, your legs. Whenever you're ready, coming back to the space. Well, I hope that was enjoyable for you. I loved getting to take you through that. Thank you. Other practices for presence. Maybe less apologies for anybody who felt that was too woo-woo for you. It's the authentic four doing their thing. Some other ways of moving into presence, especially for fours, things like cognitive distancing, naming emotions, um, you know, holding them out almost as objective experiences rather than holding them tightly. And so it's this process of learning to sort of diffuse from our feelings. I notice a feeling of melancholy rather than I'm feeling sad or I am sad. So that helps kind of shift our energy away from that heart center to more of that thinking center, creating that space that we need to then be able to make the choices that we need. Equanimity through inquiry, so actively inquiring into the stories and experiences of others. I think as a four, I get wrapped up in my own dramas, my own narratives. Um, and so to actively pull myself out of those moments and think the person I'm sitting with has stories, has experiences worth inquiring about, being curious about, allowing yourself to connect with those without being overwhelmed by your own internal weather. Gratitude for just the ordinary. Things don't always have to be grand and dramatic and extraordinary. There's actually so much beauty in the everyday, in washing dishes, in, looking at the little fingers of your child, seeing this real beauty in just the everyday mundane routines, finding beauty in the basics. The somatic grounding. So when our emotions are feeling like whirlpools, going through just what we went through before, dropping into our body center. But you can also do that through real somatic experiences like resistance training or weight bearing movement or just simply feeling the floor beneath your feet. That helps strengthen your gut knowing that fours tend to be a bit disconnected with. And finally, self-compassion. We have this real harsh inner critic as fours, replacing that with that radical self-compassion. Instead of always comparing your internal mess to someone else's external polished version, practicing being kind to yourself and your own humanity. And so all of this for the four is about shifting from this past or this future search for what's missing, this kind of longing, and grounding ourselves in the now, being more present, being more accepting of who we are or what is right now, rather than always looking for what's not quite right, what's missing in this moment. Because our presence is really that antidote for our longing. And our mission to not see our sensitivity as a defect, but rather as this bridge that can really help heal a world that is very chaotic, that feels ever changing, that we have this real beautiful mission, this beautiful purpose to bring light to the darkness. And so I just want to close with this Rumi quote that says, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." Thank you for your presence. Here's some resources if anybody feels like taking a little screenshot, just some things that I used as references throughout, but just also some kind of further reading that you might be interested in as well.
Thank you, Jen. That's amazing. Would you be up for taking some questions if anybody has any?
I would love to. I'll stop sharing so you can see my face. There we go.
Here we are. So, while we've got Jen here, does anyone have any questions that they'd like to, that have come up through this session or things that they'd like to mention? Don't be shy.
Thanks, Kate.
Well, I have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask, if I may.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. One of the things that always strikes me is that when I think about being a five, I have to remind myself that I'm all of the numbers really, and a lot of the things that you spoke about, I could feel connected to from my
Yeah.
wing,
Mhm.
and it really struck me at one stage. I was like, maybe I'm a four, not a five. But when you were talking about sort of finding that balance, how if I'm feel like I'm in my four moment,
Mhm.
how do you suggest we look a little bit towards that for us to find that balance?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's funny you say that because sometimes I'm like, am I actually a five? So yeah, I think it's the heavy wing for sure. Um, yeah, I guess, I guess I can speak from, just personal experience of when through that self-awareness of when I start to um, I don't know, go into that four spiral of fantasizing about things that drum up emotions. I catch myself, right? So there's the self-awareness piece. And then I think, okay, what can I do in this moment to try to balance that emotionality? And so for me, it's usually trying to bring in that thinking objective brain a little bit more of okay, what's the actual context that I'm in? Or what is the potential baggage that, because it's usually to do with another person. Like, what is that person going through right now that is drumming up, stirring up these emotions within me? And so I guess for me, it's that kind of pulling back and that zooming out rather than feeling so in my feels, trying to bring that thinking brain back online a bit. Um, and yet, right, we've got the thinking, feeling, body centers. And so sometimes it's, all right, I need to go take a walk. I need to get out. I need to move. I need to engage my body to try to bring that balance of moving out of just the pure feeling center into the thinking center, into that physical body center. So being in nature for me is huge. And that's going to look different for everybody, but that's how I try to achieve a bit of that balance.
Well, one last call before we end the session. Has anyone else got anything that they'd like to ask Jen while we're here?
Oh, I have a question for you, Jen.
Hey, thanks. Yeah.
How, I'm just thinking about the social instinct and when you mentioned about fours and having that sense of not belonging. Do you reckon it's a bit of a double whammy or
Say a little bit more. What do you mean a double whammy?
well, if you're a four and fours generally have a sense of a feeling of not belonging
Mm,
that you mentioned earlier, like
mm, mm.
yeah, do you think that if you're a social four, that's like even
I see.
yeah.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah, I guess so. Like, I mean, I guess I can only speak from my own experience, but um that that maybe it hurts a bit more deeply in a way because you want to be part of the herd, the social herd, and so to feel like you don't belong, um, yeah, I think double whammy probably is a really good phrase to use where yeah, it's kind of constantly moving through social spaces thinking, I don't fit here, I don't fit here, but I really, really want to. And
Mm,
so, you know, to move towards a healthier space for myself, it's kind of has been around me getting over feeling like I need to know the deep, dark secrets of other people. Like, I don't have to like that doesn't have to be the only way to connect with somebody else. Connecting over mundane things is okay too, and that's probably going to actually facilitate a stronger bond if you're not like, let's sit down and unpack all of, I don't know, all of our dramas. Let's just start with water cooler chat, and that's enough. That's nice too. Yeah, I guess for me, I've just been trying to embrace that a little bit more of maybe we'll eventually get there together, but it's okay for us to just talk about the weather and talk about sports and yeah, books
Yeah.
and yeah, I think that can be enough.
I kind of think that maybe that feeling of like, having that sense of not belonging is something that fours and fives have in common, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, 100%. Are you a social five?
yeah,
Yeah.
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 So it kind of leans into that, and from both angles in a way.
Yeah, and I think when you're in a space where you're fixating on it, it has that ironic way of actually pushing you
Push
further
you
away
further
from other
away.
people,
Yeah,
right? Like, because then you're sort of all in your own head and you're not showing up with just pure presence, right? You're not showing up with a listening ear to hear about the person sitting in front of you. It's about you, rather than about the social group that
that's
you're
right.
trying to feel part of. So I think the more in moments when I'm able to just kind of let go of that dialogue, internal dialogue, the more I can show up and just be present, hear people for whatever it is they're saying, be able to ask those curious questions so that I'm actually starting to move towards a genuine connection with them rather than this kind of forced, let's get into the dark stuff.
Yep, exactly. Cool. Thank you. Yeah.
I have to ask, Tracy, I've seen you smiling and nodding your head while Yvonne and Jen were just talking. I know they said, we should start with cooler moments, but I really would love to hear what you were thinking.
Oh, I just thanks, Cameron. I just so appreciate Jen your capacity. I said just the beautiful for capacity to to explain things with such depth and such, of course, but such sophistication and just is just such a sign of growth. When you can say that it doesn't always have to be about those really deep conversations.
Mm.
Because two of my dearest friends have the thought pathway, and so I've got the three pathways. So just, working through that's been really interesting.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I can really relate to what you're saying and appreciate it.
Thank you, Tracy. Yes, I've seen you smiling and nodding along, so glad to hear your voice in the space. Thank you
Yeah.
very much. That means a lot to me.
Mm,
Thank
mm,
you.
thank you.
All right, well, we've gone a little bit over time, so I might wind it up here, but I just want to remind you to hop onto the website and have a look at the programs coming up over the next couple of days. There is plenty more exciting things to go along to. If you're not a member, I encourage you to join. There's not only for events like this, but to become involved and spread the idea and the events like this, I suppose, to other people into the future. So feel free to contact us via the website and we can see what happens from there. So thank you very much. Thank you, Jen.
Thank
Thank you, Yvonne, and thank you for all coming along this afternoon. Really
thank you
appreciate it.
so much. And is it okay if I put my email address in the
Oh,
chat if
yes,
anybody feels
please.
like reaching out to me?
That'd be great.
This is my best email to contact me through if you'd like to stay in touch. I'd love to continue our chats.
And if by chance you do misplace this, do get in contact with us and we'll be happy to share Jen's details too.
That'd be amazing. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate your time today and hope to get to see you guys again in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Cameron.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Yvonne. Thanks, Cam.
Bye, Yvonne.